Hello everybody, and welcome to your first online lecture for lifespan development here at Cal State East Bay. It's my hope that even though we're going to be operating in this online format throughout the semester, that we'll be able to get all the material across that we could in a typical in-person semester. There's definitely some disadvantages to some of the different nuances to having an online class. But I also want to point out that as we progress here, that there are some clear advantages as well. You'll be able to pause these videos and go with them at your own pace without having to worry about whether or not you understood something completely as I was moving on in a class, or whether or not something was quite as clear as you thought it was the first time hearing it. And all of these advantages of being able to play and replay things at your convenience should help offset some of the kind of more beneficial elements of being in a classroom and sitting here in a normal course where you actually get to have a back and forth with me. In this first lecture, what I'm going to be doing is just giving you the lay of the land with the class, and also letting you know just a little bit about what to expect in terms of interactions with me and some of the future things that you'll probably encounter as we progress throughout the class. I guess with that said, one of the things I can briefly do here is just introduce myself right off the bat. My name is Christopher Gotti. I've been an instructor at Cal State East Bay now for actually almost a decade at this point, and I've taught this lifespan class numerous times as I've been an instructor here. I also teach a stress and coping course, the social psychology course, and occasionally, if I'm lucky enough, I get an intro course as well that's thrown my way as a lecturer. Not always at Cal State East Bay, but in a number of different schools in the area. So again, what is it that we'll be looking at in this lecture today? Well, in this particular video, we're going to be, as I mentioned, giving you an overview of what the class is all about. I'm not going to necessarily go into specifics of the material within the class. We're not going to give a broad overview of what lifespan development entails and how researchers look at it. That's actually what we're going to be covering in video 2. But in this video, we're going to be looking at things like grading, how you should expect to kind of be not necessarily judged, but given credit for this specific class. I'm also going to, as we go through the grading procedures and the different elements to the class, talk about some things that you could potentially do to help you. And this might be especially useful for those of you that are maybe going through an online class for the first time, or cognizant of the fact that online classes are a completely different beast and can present their own challenges. Hopefully, as we go through this first video, you'll not only have a better sense of what's required of you in this class, but you can start plotting a course to ensure that you will, as I've mentioned a couple times now, get just as much out of this as you would in an in-person class, and potentially even more. So how will we address the material in this class? How are we going to try to tackle this monumental thing of developmental psychology that goes in numerous directions and addresses a large number of different things? Well, we're going to try to break this class down into 3 general sections. The first section is going to focus on the biological side of lifespan development, and there are going to be presentations within each week that cover material in its specific area. Along with those presentations, you'll also have an assigned reading. Usually it's going to be 1 chapter. I think there's one occasion where it might be more than that. But in addition to those readings and presentations, we're going to make sure each week that you're keeping up and assess how well you understood the material by having some type of written assignment. Now, these written assignments are going to vary from week to week. We'll talk about more details relating to them a little bit later. But I want you to understand that these are my means of not only keeping you up to speed in the class, but finding a way to verify if you were able to digest the material the same way you would if we were in that in-person class and we could have a discussion on the specific topics. Now, in addition to this, we will have what will call a lecture each week. But it's important to note right off the bat that these, as you see quoted, lectures are not going to be me meeting with you for just a short period of time and necessarily presenting new material. Instead, these lectures for this class are designed to be a check-in. It's a way for me to point out some important things that I want you to be aware of. It's a chance for you to ask questions, and it's an opportunity for us as a class as a whole to create some sense of community, something that is really critical in every class, especially these online classes where students can feel occasionally detached from the instructor, the coursework, and their classmates. In addition to these 12 modules of material, we're going to have 3 exams. As I mentioned before, each area or section has 4 weeks worth of material to it. And within those 4 weeks, there's enough contents to have an own respective exam. So the pattern for this class is 4 weeks of class, then an exam week, then another 4 weeks of class, then an exam week, and then lastly another 4 weeks of class and an exam week. Because these classes are going to be online, exams have to be online as well, and coming up with exams online is a bit challenging. To make things a little bit more streamlined, each exam is going to consist of roughly 45 multiple choice questions, and you're going to have 50 minutes to take these exams. Now, these exams need to be taken within their respective time slots. This is something that is in accordance with the start of your class and the end of your class. There's going to be a little bit more of a window for when you can take these, just to make sure that there are no scheduling or timing issues. But you want to be sure that when you get ready to take these exams on the exam days, that you don't have any computer issues that you have to worry about, internet connection issues that you have to worry about, because these things, which will cover only their respective sections, are sort of a one and done thing. The 50 minutes will be enough time to get to all the questions, but that's only if you have a clear understanding of the material. Because I can't control whether or not you have your book open or your notes open while you're taking it, these exams will automatically be open note, open book, but their focus will be primarily on the readings and presentations, and actually entirely on the readings and presentations, with more emphasis on the presentations. And most of the questions will try to be more application based. That will ensure that you're not just looking up the answers to 45 questions and worrying about whether or not you can do it fast enough. Obviously, having your notes and your book with you during these exams can indeed help, but I promise you, they're specifically designed with the notion that you will have a book and notes in front of you, and I have to find a way to test understanding of the material through some mechanism related to these tests. So be ready to really try to kind of parse out the concepts within the questions and break down what it is that's being asked and what the answers are suggesting with each and every question. Again, I need to reiterate that even though this book is these exams are open book, open note, you might find these extremely challenging to get done in 50 minutes if you find yourself trying to look up the answer to every question. But if you're not, you should have ample time, just like any in-person class would, to get through that 45 multiple choice question exam within the 50-minute time period that you're allotted. As I mentioned earlier, I did want to briefly talk about the assignments for this class. I said that each assignment was going to be unique, but there are some consistencies within each of them that you want to be mindful of. Each of them is going to usually consist of a couple different questions that you're going to be asked about the material, and there's going to be different values for each of the different questions that you're being asked based on how much you need to provide and how much more detailed I would expect your responses to be. Some of the questions that you're going to get are very broad and overarching. There's a couple prompts that you'll find along the way that ask you to simply summarize the entire module. I know that that particular one is one that's caused a lot of grumbling in past semesters, but I also know, for looking for a silver lining on those, that those tend to be the ones where students do the best on the exams. It's like trying to find a way to come up with a comprehensive summary of all the material that you're presented, and some elaborate story using your own words could help with processing the information. Assuming at least that's why we see very marked improvements on exam scores when this particular prompt is given. Now, some essays, or some what we call written assignments, will ask you to simply find a way to answer a general question that allows you to show understanding of the material. Sometimes the questions could be something like, tell me something interesting that you found from the presentations. Other times it could be things where you're asked to explain how an example relates to some of the material that we're covering. It's really imperative that to do these assignments well, you've gone through all the presentation and reading material before starting these. You could, of course, read the questions and prompts before going through the material, but to provide really good answers, you are required to have a better grasp of the material than maybe you're typically used to on a week-by-week basis. But again, just like I mentioned with the summary essays, if you are doing these things, what you should find is that your scores on the exams will be really high, and a lot of the stress that you might typically encounter during an exam week will be alleviated because you've already done that groundwork through these weekly assignments that we have for this class. Now, it's also important to note with these written assignments that even though this is not an English class, I do require full responses. I've had students in the past provide a couple word responses to very broad questions, or ones where they just provide lists of answers to things. I do want to see understanding of the material in your responses, and if your responses are exceptionally brief, I can't see that. I'm not capable of deriving whether or not you have a firm grasp of what it was that was covered. So if you can, when you're working on these, give yourself enough time to not only provide full, detailed responses to each question. Usually there's some suggestion to length, but you can always go over on the length suggestions. And then after doing them, give yourself enough time to edit these things so your message can come across clearly. And I can see very easily that you really did process the material and understood it to a full degree. Another thing that's important to note with these written assignments is that these do not need to be emailed to me. Instead, they should be either uploaded or provided in the text box on the submission page for each of the different assignments. It's really important to keep in mind that putting up Google Shares or other type of Apple files that the Blackboard site cannot access is not okay. I've unfortunately seen many students in the past not complete assignments and try to do the Google Doc thing or provide corrupted files to know that I just have to mark anything that's not accessible when it's due as late. If you are late, though, it's important to note that that doesn't mean that you can't still get these things in. There is a deduction for any late work, and the deduction stands even if it's just a few seconds late. But you want to get these things in because a deduction of 25% off your grade is significantly better than a 0 score on these things. So please, again, make sure you provide full responses with each of these assignments. You give yourself enough time to submit things, and you're mindful of the due dates and times, because I will be holding students to those so we can ensure that everybody's on a level playing field and everybody's keeping up with things when they're expected to be up to date. It's, again, important to note that timing is critical for these. How will you be graded in this class? It's probably one of the prime questions that many students want to know about when they walk into a course. Well, I will be grading on the basic scale in this particular class, where anything in the 90s will be some sort of A, anything in the 80s will be some sort of B, and so on and so forth. I'll also be using the pluses and minuses like most typical classes, where if you're an 87 or above in the B's, you'll get a B plus. And if you're an 83, well, 82.99 or below, down to 80, you'll get a B minus. This is true for every single grade. I believe the one exception is the D's, where I don't believe D minuses are possible. I'll have to double check that. I should have checked that before going into recording this. but you'll see that the details of that on the syllabus. Another really important thing to note is you won't only be graded on percentage, but there is a layout of how many points you can earn in this class that you should probably think about as you're progressing. Each written assignment, as I mentioned earlier, will be worth exactly 15 points, even though there will be different questions that have different allotment of points within each of the different assignments. There's 12 in total, with each again being worth 15 points means that the write-ups for this class account for 180 points of the course total. That's roughly a little bit under 50% of the points. You also have 3 exams, as I mentioned earlier. They're, again, all multiple choice, open note, open book, covering their own respective sections. And with each of them being worth 60 points each, it again adds up to 180 points. And again, it's just worth a little bit less than half your score. What's that extra stuff then? The extra stuff is for the attendance in the lectures. You can earn 2 points for each lecture week that you attend. But I will only grade your final grade out of 372 points, or I will only grade your attendance out of 12 points. What that affords me the opportunity to do is reward those that have been coming on a regular basis. If you attend every weekly meeting, you can earn 12 extra credit points by the end of the semester. But it's really important to note that attendance means that you're not only there, you're there on time and you're there throughout the meetings. These meetings should not be exhaustive. They should not take more than 20 minutes max, I think. But those meetings are really critical for people to get information from the class. If you have meetings that you're not going to be able to make, if you review the syllabus, you'll see that there are ways to make not necessarily full credit for attendance within those weeks, but very close to full credit for attendance within those weeks. And that will, again, give everybody a chance to not only earn some points for coming each week, but maybe even get a little bit of a buffer for lost points on, say, a written assignment that missed a question or a couple questions on an exam that you didn't quite understand. In total, though, again, adds up to 372 points. I take the percentage of points that you earned out of that 372, and that's what I use to determine your grade. With no rounding, no extra credit opportunities at the end of the semester, no I liked and didn't like this person accommodations that switch anything outside of this. Now that ensures that everybody's being treated equally in this class. There's no special extra things that certain students are given because they ask or because I like somebody then in a way that kind of inclines me to help them out in a way that's unfair to others. So please, as you're progressing, keep a tally of where you're at, keep this grading scheme in mind, and hopefully it'll provide you with clarity on where you are throughout the entirety of the class. Now, some of you might be asking, since we've now gone through the lay of the land of the weekly assignments and exams and all the attendance stuff, how am I going to succeed? How am I going to make sure that I'm doing well in this class? Well, the 2 big things that you want to make sure you're doing to succeed is to keep up with the book, take notes while you're reading. I've noticed several students in the last couple semesters telling me that they read, but they don't take notes and they don't connect ideas while reading. Well, that makes reading not necessarily useless, but significantly less useful than it can be if you're not taking notes. If you're reading and taking notes, watching the videos and taking notes while you're watching the videos, please note that taking notes while watching the videos does not mean just transcribing what's on the slides. You already have the slides available to you. Taking notes should be about describing examples of how things work or talking about things that were mentioned in the lecture that aren't in the slides. Those types of notes with the videos and notes with the readings can really help you as you not only work on the exams, but work on the papers as well. Another thing that's really critical in this class is to, again, get that sense of community that we talked about before by attending the weekly meetings. I promise you, at some point in the semester, you will probably feel like the meetings are a little useless, or that they're just forcing you to go to these things and you don't really want to be there. But I can guarantee that even if you have that feeling, having that normalcy to each week, having a weekly check-in, being able to see me, being able to remind yourself about deadlines and things will pay off immensely if you can keep yourself to that schedule. One of the biggest challenges in almost every online class offered, and this is pre anything going on in the world right now, is for students to stay on task. The weekly meetings can help with that immensely. So we might not be covering specific material that often. There might not be many questions in certain weeks. You might want to not be there and instead be sleeping or hanging out with friends. But if you can make those meetings, you really should see that paying off in your grade as you progress. Another thing that I've already mentioned before that's really important to reiterate is that when you're working on these written assignments, do them with the ability to give yourself a chance to edit and really provide full responses. I often see as the semester progresses that students tend to submit their responses closer and closer to the deadline. And the responses that get closer and closer to the deadline tend to be shorter and shorter and tend to, unfortunately, at times misunderstand questions or misrepresent the information in the class. I don't think this is just a random correlation. Right? The closer you get to the deadline, the less capable you are of really giving yourself time to process the material, to come up with really good responses, and to edit those responses to make sure that your ideas are being conveyed correctly. So if you can keep yourself on task with the written assignments, get them done as early as possible, yet much like attending the weekly sections, should really help as you're progressing throughout the semester. And the last thing that you really want to make sure you're doing is that you're studying for the exams like you would if you were taking it as an in-person class. Many students, when they hear open note, open book, assume that they'll be able to get an A on an exam without even studying. I've had numerous disgruntled students after the first exam go through the realization that this is not the case. To do well, you need to understand the material. The questions are specifically designed to make sure that you can't just look up every answer, and instead you have to be able to parse out what's being asked, what the answers mean, and how those things come together to find the right response. If you do study, though, just like you would for a traditional class, you should see that be rewarded in your grades, assuming that you're studying in a way that would make it effective as if you were in a traditional class. So please keep all of these things in mind as you progress. And not only will you be probably more successful in this class, but you'll likely probably get more out of this class than you would even if it was an in-person class in a traditional semester. All right. Well, this is going to mark the end of this first presentation. As I mentioned earlier, you will have another presentation for this module that goes over what lifespan development's all about, but for today, I think we've reached a good finish line. So thank you very much for sticking through this. I wish you all the best of luck in not only this class, but all of your classes this semester, and I hope to see many of you soon. Take care.